Hey guys, welcome back to the Tennis 360 podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things tennis. My name's Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
And the time when we're filming, 2 days of round one have finished. We're going to be talking about all the matches that have happened to this point so far, such as the Naomi Osaka Garcia match. Djokovic had a very tough first round. We're going to be going over all things that have happened so far and also talking about some matches to look forward to that are going to be happening in a few days' time as well. First, do you want to talk about the Djokovic match? How much did you catch of the Prizmic match where you were watching from? The times are a bit different, are a bit hard.
Yes. So I'm based in Los Angeles. I can't even wrap my head around the time difference. It's like 18 hours forward. So we're filming today on Monday the 15th. It's already Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning in Australia. So a little bit of round one left to come. But yes, I did manage to catch about the first two sets of that match, and then I tapped out with the time difference. But it was such a high level match that I did go back and watch many of the extended highlights and of course some of the best clips that ended up on social. So I feel like I got a pretty good essence of what took place in that match.
Well, you were much smarter than me. I stayed up the whole night watching that one because I was like, I'm already awake, having watched some of the latest matches that went on that I was already thinking I was gonna stay up for. And then I was like, okay, this match started. I'll watch like the first part of this match. And then Dino Prizmic was just playing such good tennis. I was like, I have to stay up. Then he took a set off Novak. I was like, I'm screwed for the time being. There's no way I'm gonna make it through. And I watched it to the very end of the match, all the 4 hours, and it was good because I didn't have to wake up early for anything. It was a great match. Prizmic, only 18 years old, he proved himself as a very kind of good athlete. He was winning in most of the long rallies against Novak, which was really something that caught my eye. Most of the 9+ shot rallies was really towards the side of Prizmic, and it was really he was just it was just that the good athleticism. And kind of a great mentality. Saved 6 match points even at the end of the match, even when Novak was playing the kind of higher level. It was a really fun match to watch, and it was only Novak's 5th 4-hour plus match of the 2020s decade, which is just so crazy. A few of the other ones being against Rafa, so that just shows how far Prizmic really pushed Novak, and a lot of the points were really just so long and so athletic. So not ideal for Novak's first match in Australia, I think, but all the credit to the 18-year-old.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think he is one of very few teenagers on the pro ATP tour who we've seen with that type of physique. You know, Bruna kind of, Sinner does not look like that. The only other one that's comparable is Alcaraz, even though their games are very different in terms of their physicality. Just looks so strong and built out already for their age. And I think I watched Gil Gross's analysis on this. I always want to give him a credit or a shout out, but I think he explained 2 things pretty well. The first being that Prizmic has a game that's really based around him using his legs, which I think ties into what you're saying about the athleticism. He builds power and strength in his game from his legs. And I think that is a very unique approach to modern tennis, and is also a smart way to approach modern tennis in terms of longevity of your career, in terms of how the racket technology has evolved, in terms of shot production. He's just so reliable because he's building everything from the legs up. And I also think that he displayed some really good decision making on the court too. Like there were moments where he really looked like he was just happy to hang in there and defend. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all, because I think a lot of young players have this vision of kind of like all out attack, and they don't truly love defending. Whereas I think Prizmic, the reason why Djokovic found it so hard to, win against him and get it done quickly was because he was defending so well. Djokovic had to hit, a ball right on the line after a 10-shot rally to win a point off of a winner. Like this guy just wasn't missing. He was so consistent on both wings. His and his ability to just keep that up for the 4 hours. It wasn't like that went away after set 1 or set 2, I think is what impressed, anyone who watched that match the most. was like he was exhibiting the mental kind of ability and that decision-making ability that you would expect to see from someone who at least has a couple years experience on the pro tour. Because even now we talk sometimes about Alcaraz in terms of shot selection or like, some decision-making in the match. Prizmic didn't look like he had any issues with that.
Yeah, I thought he exhibited, I like the comments about the kind of leg strength, the physical strength. I saw a lot of that in what Prizmic was doing as well. Just all over the court, really hanging with Novak. And when you do play more kind of defensive style, kind of this kind of ball machine input style where you're just throwing back a ball after a ball after a ball, it's more high percentage, which I think is underrated in tennis. Where especially for a young player, it shows a lot of maturity. Actually, I think the thing about Alcaraz, so you mentioned Alcaraz, is he can play low percentage shots, but for him they're high percentage, which is really what made him such a standout. He was a ball machine, but probably the craziest ball machine you've ever seen. He'd be hitting just the crazy shots from all over the court. But Prizmic is just a ball machine. He does use a lot of his leg strength. I hope that he can stay healthy with that kind of game style. But as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be a big kind of prospect. And you can't judge anything by one match. But I would say that Prizmic did show us that he is somebody to absolutely have an eye out for, and I hope that he can maintain this kind of level of consistency as we keep watching him play. The lack of experience did show a little bit in this match, but it was always going to. Oftentimes when Prizmic did get a lead, he would kind of give it right back. After he won the set against Novak, he got broken by Novak right away in the to start off the third set. And there are a few things like that. Even in the second set, he went up a break at 3-1 with kind of a blazing forehand pass, then got broken right back by Novak. I think got broken at 15. So it just really wasn't, there are a few things like that. So it was a match of experience, but with the little experience that Prizmic did have, it was a really fantastic performance. Like you said, it was just a kind of willingness to be able to just defend and not have to go after a shot super early in the rallies, which was really impressive.
Yeah, and that's why it stretched it so long, against Novak. And I don't think Novak's rusty by any means. Like, that's not the right thing to say, but maybe he was a little taken aback by the physicality of the match. And, he hasn't played in the last 12 days too much competitively since the United Cup. And I think maybe he, sometimes it's hard playing younger guys like that. You don't have too much match footage of them, like you have match footage of him as a junior or on the Challenger Tour. Like, there's not much for you to really go off of. Plus, the kid has nothing to lose, and is going to go out there and kind of throw everything at you. I always thought when I saw the draw that, like, not that he would lose the match, but that would be a physically, challenging match. But if you look at kind of the next couple matches in his draw until the fourth round, they do look, like he might be able to get those ones wrapped up a little quicker. So I think in terms of like trajectory to the final and total court time by the end of it, I wouldn't be too worried about the fact that he's gone, a little over 4 hours in the first round. But it surely is not what he wanted. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like what you said about the little match footage. I think that Novak probably had that. I don't know if you saw Medvedev's comments on court after his first round against Atmain, but he said about the match, he said, I've really never seen the guy play before. I heard a few comments from my team that his backhand is worse than his forehand. He didn't miss a single backhand in the match. So thank you team for that. And I was like, it's just these kind of funny comments from Medvedev. When you don't have a lot of match footage, it's hard to know really what to expect. And I felt like that was a big thing. Absolutely. I like Novak's sportsmanship and kind of class afterwards. Kind of this guy saw Novak as an idol. And then after the match, Novak kind of let the whole crowd just, instead of celebrating him who just got the victory, celebrating Prizmic, who really kind of was the name that stood out in this match, and let the whole crowd kind of clap after him. And I do want to just a quick kind of comment on the Novak rustiness. He has lost a set in 10 of his last 15 matches. He's lost 2 of his last 5 matches. He's lost 3 of his last 10 matches. So these aren't numbers that you were used to seeing for most of last year from Novak. So we'll see if that means anything at all. The wrist we'll still gauge if that's something, but surely the legs, he won't want to play too many more matches like this one against Prizmic. And then another match that was huge that kind of finished super late last night was the Felix Auger-Aliassime versus Dominic Thiem match. And that is a match that as soon as I saw that in the draw, I was like, oh no. I mean, this is going to be heartbreaking either way it goes, you know? I was just like, because Felix, if he loses this match, it's going to be an absolute heartbreaker after the season he had. Dominic Thiem would surely want to win like this. The way it happened as well, 4 hours and 59 minutes, Dominic Thiem down 2-0. Thiem down 5-2 in the tiebreaker as well in the third set. And then he starts coming back. And then it's Felix 6-3 in the end anyway. It's a heartbreaker for Thiem. It would have been a heartbreaker for Felix. But here's what I'd say about the match. This is a first round match. It's not a quarterfinal. It's not a fourth round. What I hope, and it is more of a hope, it is more of a positive thought in relation to this match. But in terms of Dominic Thiem as well, I hope that it gives him confidence that this is the best level I've seen Thiem play in his comeback of 2022 and so on. He was playing amazing. Felix was playing amazing. And I hope that the level, which is honestly at the end of the day more important than the result of who would get into the second round, I hope that the level is encouraging to both of them and gives both of them a lot of confidence, especially for Felix pulling out this win in 5 hours, which is the longest match win of Felix Auger-Aliassime's career, which actually passed his match against Medvedev here 2 years ago. But this was a really incredible match. And I hope that Felix kind of has a better season. I hope Thiem can find something as well, but it was going to be heartbreaking either way for whoever lost it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is a little harsh, but for me, this was the match of the mentally weak. I just, I've had a hard time enjoying these two over the last 2-3 years, just because it's been a letdown performances wise from both of them consistently. And I mean, this is a result of what happens when, a player can't get back on the horse after having an injury or having an off season, and they're not seeded anymore, and they end up in a situation where you're drawing big names in early rounds and you have a hard time running deep in a tournament. And to me, I was thinking Thiem might be able to win this match ahead of seeing the draw, because I felt like he was showing some good signs in some of the warm-up tournaments. It looked like maybe towards the end of last year, he was starting to turn a little bit of a corner, found some enthusiasm again, some intrigue in terms of how he was going about his coaching, his training team switched up and stuff like that. And so I thought maybe he was coming in better form than Auger-Aliassime. And of course, this was a mighty battle. I mean, credit to them for being out there on the court this long. Should Auger-Aliassime have ever let it get to this point? No, in my opinion. I mean, he was in control of the match. He never should have let that third set tiebreaker get away from him. And to me, that just showed signs, again, of kind of like the cracks in the armor that weren't there 2-3 years ago when he was at his best level. And I guess with that in mind, sometimes it frustrates me because I'm like, geez, like what do you need to do to like get to the point where you're not in these types of situations? Because I'm sorry, like you're coming off of the back of the 5-hour match like that's going to make round 2 pretty freaking difficult. And from Thiem's perspective, it's like, all right, the door was left open a bit, credit to you for battling back, but then like take advantage of the opportunity and that the guy's choking and like get the match done. Do you know what I mean? It felt like either one of them was just not, it was almost like one of those nightmare WTA matches where nobody can serve it out and it just kept going and going and going. And so from that perspective, from the mental game perspective, I don't think it was the highest level. From the actual like play to play and some of the points that were mixed in there, some great tennis and some great viewing. I just don't think it was their best, kind of mental performance that I've seen from either of them in a little while.
That's fair. I suppose from a performance standpoint, it wasn't as impressive as it was from a potential standpoint, which they showed so often earlier in their careers and actually led to some great mental performances early in their careers. So I wouldn't say that they're necessarily mentally weak players, but I would say that recently they have been having bad mental performances, and a lot of that is to do with a lack of confidence. And I hope that they both can figure it out, because to me, they both have shown great mental performances in the past, but right now they're just lacking a lot of confidence, and for whatever reason, they just can't get over that line. But yeah, it definitely wasn't the highest level. I mean, a stat is Thiem hit 57 winners in the stat, but he also hit 66 unforced errors, whereas Felix hit just 54 winners, but 54 unforced errors as well, which is it's not great for either guy, even though a lot of winners. So like you said, they were showing a lot of really strong moments, but overall it was kind of a little bit on the weaker end. But yeah, Felix is a weird case, because it is literally the case of one bad, really bad, no good, terrible season of 2023 where he just couldn't seem to figure it out at all. And 2022, he ended it winning 16 matches in a row, lost to Holger-Rune in Paris, lost to who was, I believe, Rublev in ATP finals. Like, he still had a pretty great end to the 2022 season. 2023, right from the start, just wasn't there for him at all. Like, he wasn't showing improvements. He was showing a lot of errors all over the court. He was showing, like you said, weak mental performances. But I hope he finds it. To me, he did show some potential in this match, even though, like you said, he did play mentally poorer than he probably should have. Let the match go. Australian Open is his best win percentage at a major by a long shot. U.S. Open, some of the others like 60%. Australian Open, 71% win rate. So I hope he can do well. But yeah, this was always going to be a bit of a tough watch, and it's another absolute heartbreaker for a team, I think. And then the other match is Rublev taking on Seyboth Wielch. Is a crazy kind of match where Rublev was also, it's very similar actually. Rublev was up 2 sets love and lets it get away from him a bit. Seyboth Wielch playing some of the craziest shots, just so kind of athletically impressive as well. And it's just like, you didn't know which way it was going to go. It's 10-6 in the 5th set tiebreaker, I believe. So it was like, it was real crazy.
And he was down 4-1 in that 5th set tiebreaker as well. I think he said after the match that like he was convinced he was going to lose. And again, like it's what we said about him before. Like, these just kind of the difference between a mental performance of someone who's in that, real elite top bracket Grand Slam winning tier, especially on the men's side, versus someone who's knocking on the door and has been knocking on the door and just can't get over the line. Obviously, Thiem being an exception because he does have a slam. But Seyboth Wielch, I think, as a reminder for folks, he did take out Medvedev at the French Open last year in the first round. I think what surprised me is that his win percentage rate on hard courts usually has been pretty terrible. Like, he's definitely a clay court type of guy. And I was surprised to see Rublev open the door again. Similar thing kind of in the 3rd set. And the fact that he kind of got into this like strange battle and it just kind of empowered him to go for it again, like from a nothing to lose type of situation. And thank God from Rublev's perspective that he got that one over the line, because I think that would have been a marker in the sand he really wouldn't have wanted in terms of a first round loss at the first major of the year. Yeah.
It's also Rublev's kind of mental game, which I think was showing better signs last year. He was down 4-1 the 5th set tiebreaker this year. He was down 5-1 against Rune last year in the round of 16. Kind of a similar kind of match there. But I would say at this point, I would consider Rublev, who as one of the consistently mentally strongest player on the tour. He can get down on himself a lot, but at the end of the day, he's had a lot of good comebacks throughout last year, including his maiden Masters title, which he won in Monte Carlo against Rune. So that is something that I would say. And he completely let the match get away from him. It was good for him to get the comeback at the end, but I was also surprised by Seyboth Wielch's level on hard courts. It's one of these guys who I guess really likes a big match. He was also getting the crowd involved a bit. And I feel like he was playing pretty aggressive as well, even though he is known as more of a clay court guy. So it was a weird kind of match to watch and to see how he kind of took the reins on the match to come back from it. Definitely kind of a fearlessness you need to be closer to the top of the ranks. So we'll see how he can climb up, but it was good from Rublev to kind of figure it out at the end of the day anyway. But it kind of reminds me that everybody was thinking that Rublev might be the first seed out. We have had one seed out on the men's side. It's a different story on the women's side, but we've had one seed out on the men's side, and that's just pretty crazy for already two whole days of first round matches being over with. The one seed, by the way, being Nicolas Jarry, who lost to Italian player Caboli in 5 sets. And even though we've only had one seed out, we've had a lot of long matches. I think about like 23 of the first 44 men's matches that have been played that have gone over 3 hours length. I believe that we have had 15 5-set matches, and and it's just been a lot of longer matches. So, but that being said, Jarry is the only seed out. Do you have any thoughts on the kind of Jarry or any of these like kind of other matches?
I mean, I'd be curious to know, or to keep an eye on like match length time as the tournament goes on. I heard a couple of folks on the ground kind of talking about the court conditions maybe being a little bit slower than it has been in the past. Would love if someone could do some research on in terms of court speed comparisons to the previous tournaments that we've been watching, especially the US Open, where we didn't see quite as many of these long matches. But it is typical to see this type of thing early on in a tournament when the courts are probably playing at their slowest, especially on the stadium courts that have very little kind of warm-up time. And then there's always the question of the balls. Are they heavier than they have been in the past? You know, how much is that impacting length of play and kind of things like that. But yeah, I mean, I get the sense that maybe these courts are playing a little bit slower, and therefore, you know, that gives players that, you know, extra little buffer time to get more balls back in court, extend the rallies, and have more opportunities. So going to keep an eye on that. And, you know, if it quickens over time, then that should probably be the answer. That might have been a factor that's impacting here.
It could be. That's true. At the U.S. Open, I think on the second day or something, we already got the court speed for the U.S. Open. So hopefully we do have the kind of get this as part of a court speed index. But I can tell you, I was watching yesterday. It is way slower than it was last year. It felt like they were speeding up Australia like year after year, to be honest, like up until even last year. This year, it just seems like it's been a complete reversal just on an eye test. I don't know if it really is, but I think you're right about that. That being
it's also
said,
not quite as hot as it's usually been too. Like usually we're used to seeing like 90s Fahrenheit, like over 30 degrees consistently in terms of for Celsius temperatures. But when it is a little bit cooler, that also changes the court conditions, plays a little bit slower, impacts the bigger servers, things like that. You know, so I don't think we're seeing quite the same level of heat and humidity that we've seen in Australia in the past.
Yeah, that's true. First day was definitely not as hot. I think it was like early 70s Fahrenheit. Yesterday was a bit more hot and humid, and it was very sunny out. I think even Medvedev's opponents started cramping up, which is something we were used to seeing in Australia. So the heat and humidity was still pretty. I think it was pretty average yesterday, but I think overall on average, and we saw that on the first day, definitely not as hot as it usually is in Australia. But another name, speaking of the topic, I think that was a factor in Wawrinka's match yesterday against Mannarino. He was up 2-1 and up a break against Mannarino, and it looked like he might get the upset. Stan, who won this event 10 years ago. Now that Wawrinka's out, Djokovic's the only major champion left in the event. And he was so close to beating Mannarino, but then his kind of physical side completely fell apart on him. It looked like he couldn't move as much in the end of the second set. I think he won one more game after being up 3-2, and then he got bageled in the fifth set. So it was just kind of a sad case for Wawrinka, who knows how much longer these guys are going to play. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Murray-Echeverry match yesterday. What I saw, I could barely watch it, but it was just rough for Andy. And
I think both of them are three set players now. I think going out knowing that you got 5 sets to play, it's just brutal, you know, especially if you lose that first set. It's just, I don't know. You know, both of them have had a lot of injuries throughout their career, really super physical players. I think I saw some sort of stat about, you know, Murray's second serve being like one of the slowest of the tournament. You know, it's just stats that we're not used to being associated with that type of player. And unfortunately that is mother time. And, you know, but he kind of said himself, he's not sure if he's going to be back. And to be honest with you, I would be surprised if we see Andy Murray at another Australian Open next year.
Yeah. Well, something he said that I thought was interesting was that saying goodbye to the crowd, it felt completely different than it did last year, where even if he lost against Berrettini, even if he lost against Kokkinakis, and especially eventually losing in his third round match, he was incredibly proud of every performance that he gave out there. This match yesterday, he wasn't even engaging the crowd at all. He was just flat. I mean, some of the forehands that he hit looked so weird. They're falling short in the court. They just didn't have any pace on them. The serve wasn't there for him, and it just seems like some of his shots seem super spinny and loopy. And listen, Andy, here's the thing that makes it sad to watch is that I'm glad that Andy has that competitive spirit in him to still want to be fighting and playing out there. But it's just the thing of that he, even back in the day, people said stuff like Andy is a great player, but he's not the best watch, which, to be honest, I never fully agreed with. But he doesn't have the flashiest style of play where he's hitting big, and I fear that this style of play now, and accompanied with the fact that he's not playing at the highest level, some people are going to be underrating what he did in the Big Three era, especially considering his stats. At the end of the day, this is a player that should have won more than 3 majors had he been playing in any other era. So it's just the kind of worry for me that now that he's out there on the court and playing like this, it makes me worry that some people are going to be underrating what he was in his career as a whole. But even outside of that, it was just the thing of it's sad to see a guy lose 6'4", 6'2", 6'2" to Thomas Martin Etcheverry, who used to be as good as he was. And I'm not going to even speculate how much longer Andy plays. Andy is a special player. We'll see if he can have any kind of run this year, but it is the beginning of the end for players like Murray, Wawrinka, and all of these guys. So we just got to enjoy how much longer we can watch of them. And and also guys like Gil Monfils are still playing. All of these kind of guys, we don't know how much longer they're going to be, so we just have to kind of appreciate it, I think, while it's still while it's still going on. But are there any kind of other men's matches that we kind of want to get into before jumping into the women's draw of things? Berrettini withdrew. That was going to be a great first round against Tsitsipas, but he's out. So that wasn't so good. There are a few good men's matches coming up that are pretty exciting, like Eubanks versus Rublev is a good second round match. And then like Humbert taking on Zhang is a good match. There's some good ones coming up, but
De Minaur versus Arnaldi. So De Minaur played against Raonic. Raonic ended up retiring. Again, another one of those guys that we don't know how much longer we're seeing him. He made a comeback last year, and he's had injury problems for a while. But De Minaur will face the young Italian in Arnaldi in the next round. I think that will be a really entertaining match. A good get a good sense of where Arnaldi's level is there. But for the most part, I feel like the first round matches that we have seen up until now have been for the most part, pretty straightforward in terms of, expectations, seeds staying in, getting the job done, even if it's not the prettiest.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then the WTA side, which, to be honest, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I think has been more interesting than the men's side to this point. I think that, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I don't think I did, 10 seeds are out on the women's side, which is a bit ridiculous for the first 2 days of an event. Some pretty high in the ranks. You have Vondrousova being dismantled by Yemstremska 6-1, 6-2. Yemstremska obviously one of the more higher level qualifiers out there, but any reigning Wimbledon champ shouldn't be getting dismantled by a qualifier, whoever the qualifier is. Very kind of rare case there. Do you want to talk about that then?
Yeah, she was definitely on my list of early exit alert type of person. Sure. I don't think she finished the season last year on a particular high. Her Cancun performances were pretty bad. Honestly, post US Open, I thought she had a fine run at the US Open, and it looked like her wrist maybe again was a little sore. Yeah. And then in some of these warm-up tournaments, it sounded like she was having some back pain, some hip pain, and that was impacting some of her preseason and just training in general in the run-up to this Grand Slam. Having said that, though, she's just one of those players that oftentimes doesn't look like she wants to be there. Finds it hard to kind of switch up the mentality and have a fighting spirit and just go for it, even if it's not your day. We just seem to kind of see two sides of Vondrousova. It's either this excellent, crafty, creative player, or it's like really subpar and there's not much in between. And yeah, I mean, I think she's got some thinking to do, some healing to do, maybe, but definitely disappointing. And but I must say, I'm not all that surprised.
Yeah, I wasn't that surprised about Samsonova either, who just hasn't been having a good season either. She hit 16 winners in her match. It felt like at some point she just wasn't hitting any winners. She had a tough first round against Amanda Anisimova, who that's a tough player to play. Anisimova beat Osaka, defending champion at this event 2 years ago, saving match points, so she can play a good ball when she's playing her best. And Anisimova honestly performed a very high-level performance. Her backhand was kind of hanging through the court amazing. But 16 winners, 36 unforced errors for Samsonova. I don't know what's going on with her. This is a player who's been losing a lot since kind of her run, I think, in Beijing to the final there, where she got to the final. She beat Ostapenko, Kvitova, Rybakina. But since then, it just hasn't been for her at all. She was looking super flat. Her serve wasn't there. And it just, Anisimova was fully in control of all of the rallies. And it didn't even seem like Samsonova had the energy for the match as well. It didn't look like the same player who had a great standout season kind of last year. It just looked like a very kind of flat player. And she's just been losing a lot. She's lost to Laura Siegemund, like I believe twice over the last like 4 or 5 of her events. And then speaking of Siegemund, another seed out, Alexandrova, 10-8 in the third set tiebreaker. And that was a very strange match. 15 breaks between the two. In the second set, 7 consecutive breaks. It was a kind of ridiculous match. Very negative on the kind of winners to errors percentage. Both players not serving very well at all. In fact, another stat, Siegemund hit 78% of first serves in, which is like, oh, great. 55% first serve points won. And it's just like these kind of stats that show you that even the winner of this match was not performing at a high level. I don't know what happened with Alexandrova, who beat Rybakina in Adelaide like last week, but it was a very kind of strange 3-set match. Did you get to catch any of that? And what happened?
Yeah, I mean,
what happened?
Alexandrova should not be losing this match. I'm sorry. Like she has too many weapons, too many. She's a good player, and I think she had a slightly early exit at the U.S. Open last year as well. This can happen with players kind of hanging in and around the top 20. That's why people cycle in and out. I mean, I think we can point to Kudermetova as well. That was a player that was hanging close to the top 10 last season, got a couple titles, was looking good. I mean, she got a first round exit here. That's pretty disappointing. Donna Vekic, another name that, we expect to kind of continue to see improving and making her way up the rankings. She's like in that top 30, top 20 situation. She lost to Pavlyuchenkova. Again, another good player, someone who's been on the tour for a really long time, but you'd expect an in-form Vekic who, has many more matches under her belt more recently than a Pavlyuchenkova, to be able to at least kind of give her a game. It just wasn't a competitive match. Pliskova versus Lindy Noskova. Noskova is actually a player that I'm pretty excited about. She's so young still. She's 18, 19 years old. Super powerful baseliner. I watched her match versus Rybakina in Brisbane, and she, Rybakina had her way with her, but in terms of hitting from the baseline, my goodness, she hits a big ball. So actually, I wasn't super surprised by the Pliskova loss. And if there's somebody that you haven't seen watch on the WTA side before, or whose name you don't know, that maybe you should check out in the second round, I definitely recommend watching her. I think that she will be a name that comes up in the future, kind of women's power players, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like one of these kind of young kind of Czech players. There's so many of them now. I mean, look at like the Fruvertova sisters, then you look at her as well, Noskova. And then you have players at the top already, like Vondrousova, obviously have Kvitova. So it's like the Czech women's game just doesn't stop, no matter how deep you look in the rankings. It's kind of ridiculous. And I saw her match against Mira Andreeva in Brisbane as well in the quarterfinals. Mira Andreeva can play a pretty powerful, or at least very kind of solid ball. Completely hit her off the court. Coming into that match, Mira Andreeva had won 3 consecutive breadsticks. and she was destroying players. And then Noskova was like, hey, I'm actually a really good young player. I beat her in straight sets, and it's like, this is one of the more underrated players on the tour. She's young. She's going to have more time for people to get eyes on her, and she's going to get a lot of eyes on her. So shout out to Noskova for sure. And then all the other players that have kind of lost these seeds here is like Magda Linette lost, Potapova lost, Kalinina, Wong, and a few of them maybe a little bit predictable with some of their draws. I mean, Magda Linette played Wozniacki, and that was always going to be a bit of an upset alert. Linette got injured in that match, though, which was unfortunate. But some of those a bit more less surprising. But 10 seeds out. We'll see if that kind of continues as a trend. Vondrousova is the only top 10 seed out to this point. And then other kind of big names out as well. Naomi Osaka lost to Caroline Garcia. A big name was going to go out there for sure. And then, that was kind of a big match. To be honest, I didn't catch a lot of it yet. I was going to look at the highlights and kind of catch myself up because that happened, I think, at like 5 a.m. here. But did you get a chance? Did you get a chance to catch much of that one?
No, I'm on the highlight train there, and I think I'd fancied Osaka to win because I think she, skills wise on the tennis court still really has it, and Garcia at some of these previous slams has been streaky. Having said that, though, Garcia's game when she's on is so good, it's just kind of hard to know which Garcia is turning up sometimes and how nervous she's going to be. And I think from what I saw from the highlights, it was tactical pieces from Osaka's end of, not putting away balls that were landing a little short in the court that I think Osaka of 3-4 years ago would have finished off. Some of that kind of mental resilience in that second set tiebreak and kind of being able to get that one over the line and force a third, leaning into kind of her strengths a little more and just really kind of going for it, being willing to finish it off. Having said that, though, if you're even a little bit rusty against someone like Garcia, who is ultra, ultra aggressive, that can throw you off your rhythm. Your timing can be a little like, oh my goodness, like it's overwhelming. How tight Garcia stands on the serve, inside the baseline, how quickly she transitions to the net and she looks for those +1s so fast. So I think she's the type of player that if you're not feeling 100% confident in terms of going for your shots and being willing to finish off, then you're in trouble, and that is exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that was always going to be a match between two absolutely just crazy kind of aggressive kind of playing from the back. I mean, you saw it in Osaka's match against Pliskova. It was always going to be that kind of match, kind of one of those blockbusters. We have a couple of blockbusters coming up in Swiatek versus Kenin, and also another great match of Pliskova taking on Rybakina. And I was just wondering, who do you have more of an upset alert for, if you do have an upset alert in those matches? And what do you think of the Pliskova-Rybakina match and the kind of points that we might come to see in that kind of match, the big hitting from both?
Yeah, well, by the time people watch this video, you'll know the result. But here are my feelings ahead of time. I don't think I'm on upset alert for the Swiatek-Kenin match. I know that Kenin got a win over Sabalenka last year. That was a bit of a surprise win, and she here and there can go toe to toe and have a good match. But I just think Swiatek is she's learning so fast and ever evolving. I mean, I remember she said this time last year at the Australian Open that maybe she wanted it a bit too much, and that's why she wasn't able to have a good run here. Then I think after the US Open, she said similar statements of like protecting the #1 ranking was really playing on her mind. She showed in each of these moments, so it had a bad Aussie Open, then she won the French Open, then she had, a not so great US Open, then she won the WTA finals. I think she's so good at learning and improving and adjusting what she needs to adjust to get the job done. And I think she means business here. I think her wins at the United Cup were efficient and impressive and showed her at her best level. I don't really have any question marks about Swiatek in these first couple of rounds. I think she's going to be all business and be all over Kenin. And I just don't know if Kenin has the answer, even though she's a former champion here. It's just, we've just not seen that level from her ever since then in a consistent way. In terms of Rybakina and Pliskova, again, like kind of similar feelings where it's like, okay, well, if Pliskova turns up and plays how she played against Osaka 2 weeks ago, can she beat Rybakina? Yeah, for sure she can. And she's a former world number one, Grand Slam finalist and multiple Grand Slam finalists. And, she has the weapons to win, but she's just too streaky. She's too inconsistent. Some weeks she turns up and plays great tennis, and other weeks she turns up and it's really freaking awful tennis. And since the Osaka win, it's been awful tennis. And I just don't know what to expect from her. And when you're playing against someone who's as calm and efficient and mechanical as Rybakina is, in terms of like, I don't care what's going on the other side of the net. I don't care, your emotions. I know my game. I know what I can control, and I'm going to do that really well. I just don't know. It's going to require Pliskova to play her absolute best tennis, and for me, Rybakina not play her best tennis, and I just don't see that happening. So I don't have either of them on upset alert.
Okay, that's fair. I guess the one of the concerns is that Rybakina at times, including I remember Wimbledon last year and at some of her events, has kind of started off a little bit poor in a couple of her like kind of early rounds at majors. Some matches that I recall, and then also I would say if the two were kind of switched, if Pliskova was playing Swiatek and Kenin was playing Rybakina, then I probably wouldn't have big upset alerts for either one. Swiatek has a very good record against Pliskova, although I remember that Pliskova played a good match at some point, was it last year? But for the most part, I remember a double bagel that Swiatek plays against Pliskova in Rome. But I would have an upset alert for both of these matches. Not to say that I think an upset will happen, but I think that Kenin being a former champion, Swiatek never making the final there, kind of makes me feel like the confidence might be there for Kenin. My thing is that they're both inconsistent. They're both super streaky. But I would say that for me, they like a big match. They'll show up though. They still can play a big match against a big top player, and that would make it so that it's a higher chance for me of it actually of it happening in a match against the top player when these two play. And it's just that they're not going to be super good week in, week out, but they can still play amazing for a match. And if they both do show up in a match and play at their utmost best, then I think you have to look out for both of them. And I think that Sofia Kenin, although she's losing to names that a few times that are outside the top 100, she's still beating very top names. I believe she beat Krejcikova towards the end of last year. She reached the final towards the end of last year. So it's a little bit better from Kenin, and we'll see if she shows up with that at a place where she's played well before. Rybakina versus Pliskova is the big one I'd look out for, because Pliskova just played some big hitting players like Ostapenko in a very high level way. So if she continues that kind of rhythm and momentum, I think she could have a good run of it. But we'll see what all happens. I kind of think that both are a little bit on upset alert, and I think both might be a bit kind of blockbuster matches there.
Well, I'll check in with you in a few hours. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
So onto our culture section, where we talk about relevant news other than just tennis results. And the first one being Alexander Zverev, and an update there with some court allegations from a court in Germany that came out in October, November of last year to do with a sexual assault allegation from his previous girlfriend and mother of his child. He has also been featured in the new Breakpoint Netflix series. There is a whole episode dedicated to him. And he was also recently elected to the ATP Players Board, which means he was voted in for the first time from his fellow players and peers. So this came up again in conversation in terms of relevant tennis culture, predominantly because of the Breakpoint show and the fact that that episode in particular made no mention of the current ongoing allegations that are in the legal system, and also no mention of prior allegations that were made from a separate ex-girlfriend about 2 years ago that never went to a criminal case, but was investigated by the ATP and a third party, which came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough evidence to make a decision or have any disciplinary action towards the player. That doesn't mean that he was necessarily exonerated or found to be innocent of the charges or what they were investigating. So a lot of fans were pretty disappointed and concerned by the narrative that was woven in that episode in particular. Not only was there no mention of the ongoing assault allegations, which, by the way, when they did feature Nick Kyrgios in season 1, he had open assault allegations against him. And while he didn't go into those specifically, an accompanying journalist kind of gave color to that part of the story around Nick. And there was at least mention of it. Whereas in Zverev's episode, there was complete and total, omission of what was going on in Zverev's personal life. But then on top of that, the episode was kind of woven as if Sasha was a victim of Daniel Medvedev and Daniel Medvedev's antics and play style on court. It framed him up as a guy that was coming back from a really horrific injury, which he was, that kind of played this victim mentality of, oh, people play unfair against me and they pick on me and they, mentally go after me in ways that maybe they don't go after other players. And kind of the only person in this episode that was like, you know what, like Zverev has to learn to play with that is his current girlfriend, who I think is also his psychologist. And so a lot of people left feeling very uncomfortable and felt like this was an episode produced by Zverev's PR team rather than a docuseries about him as a tennis player. And for anybody that watches tennis to just omit this entirely, knowing that it's an ongoing conversation, was very disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. The optics of it are very strange. The optics of it are strange because there are legal concerns going on at the moment in Germany. In fact, yesterday, it was seen that the Zverev case is going to be going to a trial at the end of May. And it's going to a trial because Zverev said that he wants to give a sign that he wants to object to the penalty order that the court issued. So I think that the optics are so strange. The Breakpoint episode is one thing, but also the fact that now Zverev is going to be on the Player Advisory Council and the ATP Player Council, and the optics are strange. Like you said, I think a lot of the fans are feeling uncomfortable about it. And the fact that it's coming from two different women as well, in Brenda Patea and also Olia Sharapova, and it's just it leaves a lot of concern. And I would say that obviously you want that at this moment these are allegations, but these are allegations that a court is seriously considering, and you have to consider that in as well. So it's just, the optics of it are very weird, and there's been a lot of silence around the issue, and it's the silence that I think is making a lot of people uncomfortable at the moment. And I think that that's a big thing that I think deserves talking about, not necessarily saying that it is a fact that certain things happen, but that it needs to be addressed that these allegations are there.
Yeah, they're very serious allegations, and it's also the type of allegation that, historically it's just difficult to deal with, because these are he said, she said type of scenarios, and they happen behind closed doors, and they're really hard to prove. And then you always have the same arguments that go on of like, oh, she wants his money, and oh, he has the money to pay her off. And that's kind of, the back and forth, whereas people don't want to look at like what's on the piece of paper in terms of Olia Sharapova's story, who chose not to go pursue this criminally, but wanted the player investigated by the organization that he represents. And, a mother of his child who's bringing forth very similar allegations. And the German court issued a penalty order because in Germany, what would happen is they believe that there is enough evidence as it currently stands to say by credible, how do you say this? That, like, more likely than not, this took place. So we're going to issue the fine, which is about $500,000, pay it and admit guilt, or deny it and go to trial. And obviously he's gone the trial route, and I don't think that we should, in a public forum, speculate as to whether or not Zverev is guilty. But when we think about the conversation that happens around these types of allegations in other sports, I do feel like tennis hasn't set a precedent that takes these things very seriously. And it is difficult because they are independent contractors. These are individuals. These are not teams. But if we take examples, I know soccer pretty well. Like in the last year or two, there's been a couple of these types of things that have come out. Mason Greenwood had active allegations against him. He's a Manchester United player. They weren't yet formalized or heard in court in terms of decision made, but he was suspended by the club. Similar with another player called Anthony. And we've seen these types of trends not just happen in the Premier League, but in the NFL, in the NBA, and elsewhere, that when a player has this type of situation going on, that they have either been suspended or taken a leave of absence, or that they've certainly had to answer more questions than Zverev has had to answer. And what Zverev has provided in terms of commentary on it has also been a little off-putting, in the sense of like, oh, well, we all know what this is about. She just wants my money. And that's not a very sensitive way to handle this situation, regardless of whether you think you're guilty or you're innocent or not. And there's a sort of, PR training, lawyer training around what you should say with things like this going on, and it's not that. And I think, some people are like, well, why are we even talking about this if we don't know the outcome of the court trial? But I think the other thing that's important to know is that the ATP rulebook here doesn't have that many guidelines set as to like what they really should be doing. And they're also, these types of issues with tennis are taking place across the whole world. So it's really hard to gather evidence and prosecute against, because one day they're in Australia, the next day they're in Saudi Arabia. Those jurisdictions are not the same. And it's really hard for an ATP council to have these types of investigations. So my hope is that they, and I think this is what they are doing, that they're working with a third-party organization to have an internal review and start setting some principles or guidelines in terms of a system and process that a player needs to go through when there are active allegations going on. And also, what do they want to do from kind of a player representation perspective? Because I think it's hard to say you're suspended, like you can't play any tournaments until we have a verdict or an outcome. But maybe, maybe there's adjustments that need to be made in the marketing or in the rhetoric or in it just feels like it's brushed over at all times. The commentators don't talk about it. We're not talking about it in press conferences. We're not talking about it in docuseries. And it feels whitewashed. And that's what's making people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And it's strange. Obviously, a lot of these are issues that are kind of happening behind closed doors. And obviously, it's hard to make everything public. But the fact that he is a player that is currently playing events all over the world. Like you said, he's a player that is currently having a starring role in a series at the moment, with the episodes depicting him in one way or another. And it just feels strange with these issues, legal issues happening behind closed doors, with two separate cases, by the way, which just make you feel really worried about why there isn't more conversation about it. And like you said, it is about the fact that it's just the fact that this happens all over the world, these kind of cases. And you can say whether a case is true or not, but it's the fact that this kind of case happens to women all over the world. And it's just really annoying to watch people brush it off as if it's nothing. And whether some people are doing it intentionally or not, it appears that way to a lot of people. And that's not something I want to be happening at the front of tennis, because that's not what tennis is about. That's not what the sport is about. And we're not just going to be sitting here while there are legal concerns. One that is going to court is about Brenda Petea, but like you said, Olia Sharapova had a lot of really, really very serious, dramatic allegations. And what I like you said, we won't speculate about what's true because we don't know what's true. Nobody knows what's true, and there's going to be a trial that is conducted. But what is worrisome is the silence around it, and that is a silence that doesn't deserve to be happening when there are issues like this, and it's just worrisome as kind of fans of the sport and of Zverev as well.
Yeah, and I think the ATP should really have an eye on the future, and I really hope that they are working hard behind the scenes to have a framework in place on how to deal with this, on to have, you know, like to have a council that is able to review these types of allegations, that have a understanding of, you know, of what happens when it's in your legal system versus when it's, you know, an allegation like it would be in a workplace, like an HR issue or things like that. You know, not every sexual assault allegation goes to trial or goes to court. And there's many, many reasons for that. But he isn't the first player, and he will not be the last player to have assault allegations around his name. And, you know, for the ATP to basically just be like, look, this is for the courts to deal with, and we're not going to say anything until after the courts. It's like, well, fine, but maybe publish a framework of what to expect if he is found guilty, if he is not found guilty. Like, what is the order of operations? You know, what happens here, and what are the consequences or not the consequences? Because right now we still don't know. And I think that's the other frustrating piece, or, you know, for someone who maybe is a victim of sexual assault to be made to feel like, oh, you know, nothing matters until this person is proven guilty. Nothing matters, and they will continue to do and make money and be put on a pedestal in the way that they were prior to you coming out and ever saying anything. And I don't think that that is the right approach either. Of course, you are innocent until proven guilty, but that comes with a pinch of salt, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean that you get to go around and play yourself as a victim, have, you know, this PR team come out and paint you to be this certain type of person. It's very deceptive. And then on top of that, it feels like there's this strange aura around him of like commentators and press and news not being willing to ask the question of him either, or talk about it either. And it's like, I get it. Maybe the commentators are like, look, I don't want to talk about this every match Zverev has. But the reality is, a court just set his date in May. So if they're not going to talk about this at the Australian Open in his next match, I don't think that that's right. And that's also for media organizations who talk about tennis or cover tennis to set and discuss guidelines for, because they certainly talk about it for players in the NFL, for players in the Premier League, and in other sports. They don't get the same cotton wool treatment that Sasha Zverev has received, and that is true.
Yes, and it's also the fact that putting him in a light that is very positive is very different from putting him in any kind of light whatsoever. I mean, it's the fact that we're painting him in a positive light. It does have that feeling of it has that feeling of putting it under the rug, which is just something that I think is making a lot of people kind of uncomfortable. And it's something that at least deserves to be discussed. It needs to be some attention to it. And the kind of thought of, well, it's not related to his tennis. Well, it's still very important issues to discuss either way. And it's and if they are true, by the way, then it is related to his tennis, but we're not going to speak to whether it's true or not. So, but either way, there shouldn't be a silence around these kind of issues, and it's good for more and more people to kind of bring this up, that it's happening. And silence is never good for any kind of issues like this, and hopefully that there can be more conversation attached to it.
Yeah, and I hope that both of these women, you know, are receiving the support that they need, because this is a stressful time, a sad time. And I think that, you know, it's important to keep victims in mind whenever we have these types of conversations. It can be triggering. It can be really painful. You know, to kind of go after this narrative of or rhetoric sometimes that you see online of loads of women lie. I would just always encourage people to be really careful about that on both sides, you know, and to exercise some sensitivity and some emotional care when speaking about potential victims of these types of crimes, and also think about it through the lens of, these are professional athletes that are put on a pedestal that are making millions and millions of dollars a year. Him in particular has all of these brand deals and has won major big tournaments in the past. That if you looked at it through a lens of like, what would happen in my own workplace, right? If these types of allegations came up, and there would be safeguards or things put in place from an HR perspective, that meant even if the person didn't get fired, that maybe they're not coming to the office, or maybe they're not allowed to be in the same meetings with that person, or maybe there's certain safeguards that are, other safeguards that are in place. And to me, the fact that there's been absolutely nothing, no, like, hey, if you are a victim of sexual assault, here's a number or line to call. Here are resources for you, because this conversation could be triggering, could be upsetting, all of these types of things. It's just like, where is that portion of it? It's all about Zverev. Is he guilty? Is he not guilty? When's the court case? When's not the court case? Blah, blah. It's all about him. And that is the other thing that from a victim's perspective is pretty upsetting, and they should honestly have a different approach in terms of, okay, this is a conversation that's going on, whether it's true or not. This is the time to speak to anybody that might be going through something like this, because we are an organization with millions of eyeballs. We set an example, and if we don't lead by example, then people follow in those footsteps. And that to me feels a little irresponsible that that's not been considered either.
Yeah. I think it's perfectly said. I think often we look at the perpetrator more than a victim or a potential victim, and it's just like, you have to be careful on social media. People will just say anything, and these are very dramatic, emotional stories and allegations. Nobody knows what's true about Zverev or about the victims, what happened in these situations. And but these stories are just so dramatic. Some of these allegations are as serious as Zverev punching a victim, or choking Brenda, or punching Olya. I mean, these are very serious allegations. So just to be careful on social media, where it's so easy to say anything, to just be careful, because nobody knows. We don't know, but it's important to at least bring up these topics, because it's not healthy for the sport if we don't.
I agree. Moving on to a slightly lighter-hearted topic, a couple of things here. The Ben Shelton Djokovic rivalry / controversy came up again in the press conference. I was surprised about this. I was like, I thought this was in 2023. Like, I thought this was US Open. Clearly, it's not. No. I don't know what exactly was asked of Novak Djokovic. It was a French reporter, but the quote was as follows from Novak Djokovic. This is my reaction to a provocation that came from the other side. It was a reaction against him. He did not behave properly, with respect on court and before the match. I'm never going to make fun of someone if they don't do something first. Every time I lose, I always give my opponent a hug. I congratulate him, I respect him and his team. If anyone places himself in the unsportsmanlike zone, I react. I thought that this was in stark contrast to what he said initially after copying Ben Shelton's celebration at the US Open, which was expressed in a much more lighthearted manner around, oh, I like this celebration. I thought it was cool. I just wanted to copy it. Which, by the way, when I watched it in the moment and when I watched that press conference, I was like, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. Like, you don't do that. Like, that's not, that's the typical Djokovic type of like winding you up behavior. And yeah, he doesn't usually do that unless he's annoyed about something. And I just figured Ben must have gotten under his skin in some type of way, didn't like, Ben's approach to the match. I do remember watching Ben's press conferences prior to the match where he basically wasn't going to let the aura of Djokovic in a semifinal at a US Open psych him out. And he didn't want to talk the guy up and didn't want to give him, all of the plaudits and maybe respect in the way that other players have in the past, and sit there in the presser and be like, yeah, this guy's won 24, 23 Grand Slams and like, I'm probably not going to beat him. Like, that wasn't the approach that Ben Shelton had. Having said that, I didn't think it was unsportsmanlike. And I also, in watching that match, didn't see anything where I was like, oh, geez, bro, really? Like, he wasn't up to antics. Like, you know, if Zverev wants to point out unsportsmanlike conduct from Medvedev, oh, he took the net post out and he went and took a bathroom break between games or whatever it is, Ben wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't calling the trainer. He wasn't like, you know, taking exorbitant amounts of time. He was just loud. He was vocal. He was into it and he was having a good time. And then Ben was asked on what his thoughts might be in response to Djokovic's comments. And again, I thought he handled it really well at the US Open and said, copying is the sincerest form of flattery. And here's what he said yesterday. He said, I don't really have anything else to say on the whole US Open situation. I feel like I've been asked about it constantly in the last 4 or 5 months. I feel like I've said my piece on the matter. I would rather just let it settle and move forward. We're in Australia now. We're at the Australian Open, not the US Open anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that Ben had wonderful responses both times. The team's just like, I don't care. It was like, I don't know why Novak brought this up again. It feels like a strange thing to bring up against a young player who, like you said, was showed a bit of a fearless attitude, trying to hype up the crowd. I guess maybe one of the issues that Novak could have had was the fact that at some points the crowd was cheering after Novak's double faults or something like this. So you could say something like, maybe Ben should have tried to quiet the crowd down or something, or like not at least cheer the crowd. But it's like, he's there to play a match. He's here to hype up the crowd. And I just think the argument is more about, it just feels like it's a weird thing to be so negative about a young player having fun on the court and just showing his kind of big kind of attitude out there. It just feels like a weird thing. One thing I will say is that Novak was definitely being sarcastic in his US Open comments. It was definitely a huge twinge of sarcasm. But that being said, the fact that there's this much kind of disdain behind that sarcasm to bring that up again is just like such a weird thing for Novak to be doing. It seems odd. I don't get it.
Yeah, and you know, maybe the press is playing into it a little bit in anticipation that they might meet in the 4th round here in Australia. Mm-hmm. But you know, again, it's just like, why is this the storyline that you guys want to lean into when there's way more serious, like, important freaking news to like report on? Like, this is the story of 2023. Like, leave that in the past. Whatever comes of a potential 4th round matchup, you guys can ask them then. Is there any carry on? Is there any? But you know, we're talking about hypothetical situations that don't yet exist. Both of them have to get there first. And in particular, that US Open situation, it's like, that's a US based player. That's a teenager. Yeah. That's his first rookie year on tour. Like, his only 2nd time playing at the US Open. Do we want to talk about what Novak Djokovic did in his first few years of playing slams, imitating players with, you know, stuff that offended people early on in his career? And he certainly was not the shining beacon of sportsman-like behavior when he was 19 years old. You want to look back at some of the quotes that Andy Roddick and people had about him, you know, in terms of making up injuries and all sorts of accusations. Not saying that they're true, but it's just like, bro, if you are this wise old 36-year-old man who's like been through it all, then I would have thought you could put yourself in the shoes of a 19-year-old a little bit better and kind of have an understanding of where that energy, enthusiasm is coming from, maybe where that mentality is coming from of like, I am not afraid of you. Like, I don't need to sit here and blow smoke up your ass. Like, everybody else does that. And how does that work out for them? And I'm not saying it worked for Ben, but it's just like, unless something was really said behind the scenes that we don't know about, it just feels like such unnecessary ridicule and finger pointing. And it's like, for why? You beat the guy in straight sets and then you won the tournament. I mean, why are you so irritated? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be too negative on Novak, though, to be honest. I think that we don't know really what happened behind the scenes. And he did mention that there was even stuff going on behind the scenes. He mentioned that Shelton was trash talking Novak a little bit up. So I don't want to be fully negative on Novak, but I will say that I found it weird that they're bringing up the comments again. Another thing is, I like the drama in tennis. I like the entertainment value that drama in tennis brings. But it's not... why are you asking Ben Shelton about it 5 months after it happened? It happened. It's in the past.
Yeah.
Why are we trying to make? There's so many exciting things in tennis. Tennis is an exciting sport. I know it's a racket sport. I know there's not a whole team playing on the court. I know some people find it boring. I know if you turn on tennis for 1 second, you're like, oh, why is this that interesting? I understand all of that. Tennis has exciting moments, and guess what? It has exciting moments because you have huge build-ups to 5 sets of 5-hour tennis playing nonstop from 2 guys on the court, bringing their physical and mental all out there, going against each other, and have emotional moments like the phone call celebration from Novak and Shelton, which is great, but that happened 5 months ago. But you have moments like that, and if you understand why I'm saying, like, tennis has its exciting moments, it has its exciting feuds, its exciting drama. We were talking about Laura Siegemund in her match the other day, just yelling like crazy. And whether you like her or not, or whether you like these players, you like to see moments like that on the court. And it's just like, you like to see players showing their personality in this kind of drama element. But that's happening all the time. You have exciting moments happening in tennis all the time. Why are we talking about something that happened in the U.S. Open semifinals? It's like, we don't have, there's so many things to market in tennis and things that are exciting about tennis from tennis fans. I'm a tennis fan. If you are a tennis fan and you see, if you're actually watching tennis and paying attention, then you would be marketing the right things. And we're in such a good place on the men's side and the women's side as well, where it just makes no sense to me that we aren't marketing the right things. And instead, we're looking at a moment between Kokkinakis and Munar at the net where they have a nice conversation for 2 hours discussing something at the net, rather than like dramatic moments that are happening throughout the whole tournaments. And it makes no sense to me. And it's just like, we're trying to make something that's not there happen. And let's just actually see the exciting moments happening in the sport, rather than talking about a moment that happened 6 months ago between a young guy and one of the greatest of all time that I really don't understand why we're still picking at it, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't get it either. And I do think, sometimes when you're the old guy on the block, when you've been through these loops, you sat through press conferences, he's been through controversies, he's had moments before Ben Shelton, and he will have moments after Ben Shelton. And it's just like, he's world number one. And to me, you should be experienced enough to answer this question of like, the way that Ben did. This was last year's drama. What happened. We have our differences. We keep that in the locker room. That's between him and I. Y'all don't need to know those details. And how I feel about him is how I feel about him. But I don't need to answer these questions anymore because it's irrelevant. I don't know. Again, like, it makes you think like something must have really been said for him to be this wound up. Because it's just odd. It's an odd approach.
But then surely he should have been more specific about what the issue. It seemed like a weird situation for sure.
Yeah,
I didn't get it.
Leaving that one, we have another culture thing that kind of came up that was just a little funny. The USTA, which is the kind of like American Tennis Association, they released a social post which was a cartoon, and it was a cartoon of the American seeded players at the Australian Open. And it was drawn by the artist or in the style of the Wild Thornberrys. So if you know that style, you know that the characters, the cartoons are not meant to be good looking, okay? And everybody looks freaking ugly. Yeah. And so this post went live on the USTA's account, and Coco Gauff, Ben Shelton, and then Pegula and some others got in the mix and saw this thing and was like, what the heck is this? This is hideous. And they were making fun of each other as to, like, in particular how ugly Ben Shelton and Seb Korda looked, but also just Coco was like, really, like, do you have to draw us in this style? Like, you have to do us like that? Like, could you draw us like Bratz dolls or something, is what she mentioned. So this was such a funny thing to me, because it was like the typical translation of internet and digital culture or social media culture that completely does not translate across different generations. You have your Gen Zers and like early or late millennials having a laugh and joking around on Twitter and Instagram, leaving comments that from an older generation's perspective were then taken really seriously. Yeah. And there was a bunch of articles written about how the cartoon was offensive and how upset Coco was, and it resulted in the USTA deleting the post. And later on in a press conference, Coco Gauff revealed that she was just up late at night and was literally joking around because she thought the thing was funny, like ugly, but funny. And that they were all just having a laugh and texting each other, and that this was nothing very serious, and that she did not ask for the post to be taken down. So I just thought it was such a great little moment of like, here's, you know, such a young person having to explain to the old media of like, no, like this is a joke.
Yeah, and it's also Coco, who's such like a funny, innocent personality out there, and also Ben Shelton, all these kind of American, and they're just like kind of laughing about it. And they were drawn in a very ugly way. They looked hideous in the drawing. Even Coco said like something like, "Wow, the art is great, but please don't do this again," because she was laughing about it. And the people just didn't get it, and it was really a funny moment. And it was taken way too seriously, but it really is a disconnect there, and it shows a big disconnect of like these younger players and just how they are online. And it was definitely supposed to be in a much more comical, lighthearted sense than it was taken from how Coco was Coco was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a joke kind of from all ends. Like, it was just a funny piece of content. And, like, she was like, yo, bro, like, I look fucking ugly in this. Like, why are you me like this? You know? Right. Like, but that's that type of, you know, TikTok, social media humor that young people have that, yeah, maybe different generations, like, can't read between the lines or don't get the joke. But, yeah, I feel bad for whoever posted that, the USTA, because they probably got roasted and maybe unnecessarily so. Last little piece of news to add to the culture section before we wrap it up that I thought was interesting to share with you guys, because it's an unusual change. So Maria Sakkari has switched from using a Wilson Ultra, which she's used for over the last 10 years, and she's now playing with their newest technology, the Wilson Shift racket. Now, many of you know that players play with rackets that are designed to look like the latest models and versions of rackets that are available on a retail level to, you know, all kind of rack level players. But a lot of these pros are not actually playing with the model that it's painted to look like, or if there is that model, it's definitely souped up with a lot of customizations and adjustments to the racket itself, in that it would really play pretty differently from what you would get retail stock wise of that type of racket. But Wilson is pretty, I guess, pretty strict about new racket technologies that players are playing with actually being that racket that's available at retail. Now, that doesn't mean that she maybe, you know, added some lead tape or kind of, you know, made some minor adjustments, but those are adjustments that anybody could make, you know, on that at their own level. So this is a racket, the Wilson Shift, that's available now. It was in a prototype kind of space over the last 18 months. It's now available at retail. It's a very spin heavy racket, and she commented that she feels like her forehand has changed a little bit as a result of changing the racket, and she feels like she's upped the power. That would make sense a little bit based on how we've seen her play so far this year. She's hitting a big ball. It sounds like she's had a really strong off season. And I think that this is just like an interesting little culture story to have in the back of our minds as we watch the Sakkari story develop this year and see if anything changes from her game style and kind of how she goes about things. But it's also interesting because it's unusual in the sense of how I explained that this is a racket that's actually available to folks that, you know, you and I can play with, which is an opportunity that most of the time we don't have from a rec player perspective. So I think that that's a pretty cool change from Wilson and a pretty cool change from her to see her playing with that new technology. And I'm interested to see what the results will look like.
Yeah, well, I don't have much to add to that. I just think that that's a kind of interesting piece for Sakkari, and I like seeing people experiment with new technologies. Anyway, we'll be back with more kind of on the Australian Open when more matches kind of happen. We're 2 days into the event. It's going to be really interesting next week. I think talk about all that is going to go down because there's going to be some crazy matches by the time we meet next week, I'm sure. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget to like the video like always if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe, Quality Shot Tennis as well if you enjoyed it. I've been Anthony Hirsch.
And I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
We'll see you guys at the next episode.
Bye.